Welcome back to our channel where we share updates and untold stories about Catherine, Princess of Wales and her royal family. Today we bring you some news. Camilla caught leaving Buckingham after darkest secret exposed on her house. There is a tale going around that talks about a big problem that has happened within the British monarchy. The issue is founded on reports that valuable items from the royal collection have been moved, abused, or somehow lost. It started out as a quiet, bureaucratic issue in the months after Queen Elizabeth II died, but it swiftly turned into a heated emotional fight between senior royals and long-serving courtiers. This fight also put people's trust in an organization that depends on ritual and continuity as much as it does on the law at risk. The narrative is about gems that are important to history and to the people who own them. Some of these diamonds are strongly linked to the late Queen, while others are linked to the public's memories of Diana, Princess of Wales. Many individuals within the palace thought it was wrong for these treasures to leave closely guarded royal vaults and be moved or looked at in ways that were not always recorded. This is what current and former palace workers have said, as well as what has been reported since then. To understand why this issue is so combustible, you need to know about the royal collection and how it works. It's not just a pile of expensive things. The collection is a large group of artworks, ceremonial objects, decorations, and jewels that have been passed down through the years. The sovereign holds them in trust for both the nation and future generations. Some things are considered the monarch's private property since they were given to them or passed down to them. Since of this, they are subject to different legal rules. There are, however, a lot of things that are kept on purpose as part of a legacy that goes beyond the private estate of any one person. Some of these things include state jewels, coronation regalia, and family treasures. The lines have not always been clear, especially during the lengthy reign of Elizabeth II, who frequently wore official and private things at the same time. This was particularly true throughout her time on the throne. Because she was the boss, there was little room for dispute. Goods were worn, loaned, or moved based on her judgment and habit, which led to habits that were more ingrained than those that were written down. The late Queen's practice of wearing state and private objects as she pleased led to the creation of a cultural shorthand. It was seen to be safe and appropriate no matter what if the Queen chose to wear it. This method kept the collection from being looked at for many generations. By the time she died, the barrier was gone, and the institutional blurring had become a weakness. The royal collection is also a live record of the history of the country. Some people think that the sapphire brooch Queen Victoria gave them is more than simply jewelry. It reminds them of a period when the UK was at the top of its empire. An emerald necklace worn by a young Elizabeth II at a state dinner represents the end of the austerity that was forced on people during the war and the start of a new modern monarchy. These artifacts will always be there, which is a continual reminder that the monarchy's authority is based on both ceremony and continuity. When objects related to personalities like Diana go missing or seem to be handled without the usual care, it makes a lot of people feel that a cultural memory that everyone shares has been broken. The diamonds that are related to Diana have a very strong effect on people. Diana's solitary pearl bracelet became a sign of vulnerability and closeness. The famed sapphire engagement ring and other diamond items were part of the story of a lady who had to deal with a lot of personal and public stress. These pieces of jewelry formed a part of Diana's public persona. Her sons and many other people who were interested in Diana's legacy saw these things as more than just decorations. They saw them as relics. In addition to the risk of losing money, not taking care of them is also considered as an act of erasure or destruction. That's one of the reasons why the rumors hit home when they originally came out. It wasn't a formal audit or a whistleblower's disclosure that gave the first clear sign that anything was wrong. It was Catherine, the Princess of Wales, who is well known for paying attention to the collection's visual and historical consistency. This was the first big hint that something was awry. Catherine often talks about the royal heritage when she plans public events. She knows that the clothes she chooses show that she is consistent and respectful. During one of these research sessions for an upcoming state-related event, she noticed that a brooch made of sapphires and diamonds, which had been widely and publicly linked to Princess Diana through many well-known photos, was missing from the vault location that had been recorded. The entry in the actual ledger and the one in the digital inventory didn't match up. Even though a return had been recorded, the space in the tray that was lined with velvet was still empty. At first, the people who worked at the palace thought the explanation was normal. The collection often lends items to shows, sends them to conservators for cleaning, or moves them for safe photography. These are all instances of how things usually move about in the collection. But when the clerks went over the papers again, they found that the paperwork didn't back up the supposition. There was no loan to an exhibition that was going out, no conservator's docket that showed a temporary removal, and no approval from the collection's usual caretakers for the removal. In a highly procedure-oriented environment, this little difference was quite important, since the most recent movement recorded in one system did not have a matching return. Not long later, further unauthorized indications came to emerge. A person who had recently been fired from his job as a junior footman told a former co-worker that he had been told numerous times to deliver baggage coated in velvet to Ray Mill House, which is Queen Camilla's private home in Wiltshire. He said that the cases were being handled in a unique way, that they should be kept unopened in a room with strong light, and that he had seen what he thought was Diana's multi-strand pearl bracelet inside the box before the lid was slammed shut, and he was urged to forget what he had seen. He also said that the cases were locked up in a room with a lot of light. In a company culture that values discretion and following orders, this sort of order carried a lot of weight and raised a lot of eyebrows when combined with other strange things. A senior assistant in charge of supervising transportation saw delivery slips that said authorized, but had an unusual name on them, Queen Camilla's. People who had worked for Elizabeth II for a long time remembered things moving around in strange ways, cases moving very quickly, or items being accounted for with vague terms like valuation or private use. The signature was unusual because the normal procedure, which was especially important for items that were thought to be part of the royal collection, required the counter-signature of the keeper of the royal collection or someone else who had been given the authority to sign documents. The slips had notes that were not very clear, with phrases like private appraisal, review for wear, and potential loan. While such wording might be okay in some situations, the lack of normal supporting documentation made the staff worry. After then, the trail of evidence spread outside the royal gates. During this time, international auction houses began putting stuff in their catalogs that looked a lot like the things that had been photographed on the late Queen, or the things that were listed in the internal Windsor inventory. A catalog in Monaco showed an emerald necklace from the Victorian era, and an archivist knew right once what it was. The picture that came with the necklace looked a lot like a headshot of a young Princess Elizabeth from the 1950s. The provenance note for the sale was written in a very vague way, saying that the item came from a distinguished European collection. This is a common way for sellers to keep things private, but the design and location were clear enough to make comparisons. A separate brochure for a private sale prospectus showed off a sapphire necklace with a one-of-a-kind clasp. Palace archivists noted that this specific object was unusual and that it looked like something that had been documented in the royal collection. Because of the comparable timing, the people who worked at the palace grew increasingly suspicious. This led to pictures and lists appearing soon after the vault's problems were found. As these signs become more common, Catherine began keeping a notebook. Her records contained dates, descriptions of items, copies of ledger entries, and recollections from staff members. The log, which started off as a practical inventory, grew into a file as people checked auction catalogs, pictures of past royal appearances, and internal transfer records. She told Prince William, her husband, about the findings in a private way. William had a personal connection to this, since he could see his mother wearing various things from his youth. Sources say he felt angry and protective. The idea that objects that were so deeply tied to Diana's life would have been moved or seen as negotiable goods was like stealing to him. The news eventually got around. To start their own work internet groups of royal watchers, amateur historians and jewelry lovers began to compare low-resolution auction photos with historical ones. There were specific forums with side-by-side pictures, and there were Twitter threads and private Facebook groups that collected stories. Influencers who observed the same things made the comparisons bigger, and hashtags like "WandWhere are the jewels" and "Protect Diana's legacy" began to proliferate on social media. What had been a group of problems inside the company became something that people spoke about in public in only a few days. Before it was settled, the issue went to the polls. A prominent newspaper did a survey over the weekend and found that a lot of people trusted the charges of mismanagement. Almost 2/3 of the people who answered said they thought the diamonds had been abused, and fewer than 15% said they trusted Queen Camilla to take care of them. These surveys aren't final, but they are worrying for a constitutional monarchy which relies on the public's respect to be legitimate. The numbers showed that the issue had the potential to become more than simply an administrative scandal, which might lead to a crisis of public trust. The atmosphere became increasingly strained and irritated at Buckingham Palace and other royal residences. Longtime staff, many of whom had worked there before Queen Elizabeth II, and had a strong loyalty to her legacy, were split between wanting to keep the institution going and having to be honest about problems. A lot of these workers started working there during Queen Elizabeth II's reign. Some of them told me in private that they had seen strange changes or movements made to the ledger at the last minute, but they were too scared to speak up because they were afraid of what would happen to them if they did. A senior archivist who had formerly raised concerns about a collection of sapphires stated that his employment had been restructured in a short amount of time. His co-workers considered this as a clear hint that they should not continue with the scenario. Some workers thought it was their moral duty to defend national assets, which clashed with informal rules like the cultural norm of being silent and obeying authority. Princess Anne reacted differently. She was known for being responsible in both her personal and professional life and for not being swayed by public relations or emotion. She saw the clues and circumstantial evidence as reasons to start an investigation that was both discreet and thorough. The small trusted team she put together included a retired equerry who knew a lot about royal protocol, a senior archivist who had been fired before for signaling concerns, and a former lady-in-waiting who knew a lot about the family's hidden history of their treasures. It's important to remember that Anne's team worked hard to get documented proof instead than just confirming hearsay. Many media called the way she did it clinical. She wanted to know whether the policy had been broken and if the deceased king's orders had been ignored. The group began a strict procedure of comparing the internal inventory to the information that was available for the sale outside. They found some amazing overlaps. Christie's produced a pre-auction catalog in May that featured pictures and a condition report that was quite similar to the one that had been published previously. The diamond and sapphire brooch that had been reported stolen from a Windsor vault at the beginning of March was also in the catalog. In June, a private sale prospectus for Geneva promoted a pearl and diamond necklace. It was stated that the item had been taken away in April. It was exceedingly unlikely that there would be an inadvertent likeness, since some of the matching features were so exact, including unique clasps, engravings, or chain patterns. Each match might have been described on its own, but when they were all put together, they formed a pattern that needed to be explained. After then, more direct documentary evidence was found. There was proof that high-value gems had been moved from royal vaults to places outside of the UK using sign-out papers that Queen Camilla had signed. Shipping and insurance invoices showed this proof. The forms said that the purpose of the movement was evaluation, or private appraisal. In a situation where any removal of collection items usually needed counter-signatures and close monitoring, it was clear that there were no return records or official appraisal reports. These gaps not only showed that the processes weren't being followed, but they also showed that someone may be trying to hide anything on purpose. The team got a slew of emails between a well-known Geneva gem appraiser and a recognized contact in Camilla's family. These communications were considerably worse than the ones they already had. The email's tone was clear. It spoke about the commercial value of unprovenanced but significant historical pieces and how they may be discreetly placed with private collectors. The trades used transactional and commodified language to talk to one another. Anne's team saw the messages as a logical explanation of purpose, which turned their doubts into a convincing story. The communication revealed that there was a willingness not just to evaluate, but also to make money from, or at least look into the prospect of private disposal of items whose place in the collection should have stopped such discussion. Princess Anne asked King Charles and Queen Camilla to meet with her privately at Clarence's house. She had a file with shipping receipts, mismatched inventory, and letters in it. She didn't arrive with a big announcement or a flourish. Instead, she carried a binder full of documents, pictures, and a long list of things that didn't add up. Anne's style in the stories that came next was simple and methodical. She spoke in a way that was supposed to command fleets of logistics and equerries, using explicit references to dates and signatures instead of employing moralizing rhetoric. Some others who were present say that her posture in the room may be seen as a clear and robust demand for accountability rather than an act of hate. Several people who saw the occurrence said that Queen Camilla's first reaction was anger. She maintained that there was no wrongdoing and that the diamonds that were handled in front of her had been moved for legitimate purposes, such insurance evaluations, or to be chosen for personal use. She also said that any matches with auction photos were either a coincidence or the result of private deals that happened before she became engaged or while she was participating. She severely criticized Catherine, saying that she made up the tale to protect her own reputation, and she said that Anne's probe was a personal attack based on long-standing family feuds and rivalries. As the lines between duty loyalty and personal grudge were less clear, the dispute got hotter. Anne didn't only get her information from the circumstantial conversation. She made a different paper that was more ethically significant. It was a handwritten letter from Queen Elizabeth II that she wrote in her latter years. The late Queen asked Princess Anne to keep an eye on the security of several treasures in the letter. The letter listed things that were connected to Diana and said that they never be removed from the core royal collection without the express consensus of both her sons. The letter wasn't a formal legal document, but it was very important in the moral economy of the monarchy because it was a private note from the sovereign written in her own handwriting, and it told them what to do. The issue was framed as a matter of compliance with the expressed wishes of the deceased monarch rather than just a familial dispute over property. It was harder to keep denying when faced with the evidence. Because of the late Queen's handwriting, clear instructions, and paper trail, there wasn't much room for plausible deniability. People in the room could see that the moment was quite clear morally. It was clear that King Charles was torn throughout the conversation. He went back and forth between following his mother's last commands and wanting to protect his bride. The accounts of the meeting show how tense the two emotions were with one another. A man who had spent years balancing loyalties in both private and public life said the situation was excruciating and paralyzing. He had spent his entire life dealing with these discrepancies. Senior advisors in the palace knew that the issue was quickly becoming more than just a private disagreement. There had already been leaks to the media, and hiding the truth would definitely be perceived as evidence of institutional collaboration. Because of these anxieties, the monarchy faced a crisis that was similar to the ones it had faced in the 1990s. The only questions that seemed to be remaining were how the news would be broken and how bad the effects would be for the public. It broke in a really beautiful manner. A tabloid that many people read on Sunday mornings had an exposé on its front page. The article's headline screamed, "Camilla's secret jewel sales exposed." In the essay, anonymous palace insider claims were made, shipping record problems were claimed, and auction appearances were highlighted. The letter from the late Queen was the main point of the story. The tabloid said that Elizabeth II's choice to make Anne the guardian of certain jewels was a symbolic slap on the wrist for Camilla and a confirmation of Anne's fears. The newspaper ran two pictures next to each other. One was an old photo of Diana's arm with her pearl bracelet flashing brilliantly in a close-up view. The other was an incomplete but compelling picture from a Middle Eastern auction catalog. A lot of readers didn't have to say anything about the visual contrast. The people reacted right away and with a lot of emotion. A lot of people stood in front of Buckingham Palace brandishing hand-painted placards that said things like, "Return Diana's jewels," and "Anne was right." These posters showed a combination of anguish and moral fury. The story spread like wildfire on social media, and hashtags like #YardJewelGate, Camilla Exposed, and Diana's Legacy were very popular across the world for several days. Memes were intended to be disrespectful. Some utilized sarcastic pictures while others put modern criminals in a Dickensian setting. Commentators spoke about how the drama was relevant to other royal issues and made light of the theatrical elements that were prevalent in the debate. Within 48 hours, analytics teams at several newsrooms estimated that linked content had been seen or shared more than 20 million times. This reminded people that in today's world of social media, a palace scandal is both very contagious and hard to stop. The tale gained traction when Prince Harry spoke out from his home in California. He put out a statement via his team that included parts of private letters that his mother supposedly wrote in the 1990s. She wrote about how upset she was to find out that something she thought was personal was purportedly in Camilla's hands. The account was more dramatic since it included Diana's own words, whether they were really said or only paraphrased in a certain way. It made the audience think that the tale was not only about the things, but also about the continuous unresolved human agony that Diana's memories brought up. Newspapers had headlines that made it seem like Diana spoke from beyond the grave, and radio hosts played old film of the princess wearing the things that were said to be in dispute. There had been a lot of talk about it, and it had turned into a moral drama about inheritance betrayal and the honesty of a dead king's wishes. International sources and traditional broadcasters made the topic bigger. The BBC gave historians the chance to explain the legal and cultural status of the royal collection and put the controversy in context. News organizations all around the globe seized on the story. In the U.S., it was called Jewelgate by major networks. The French publication Le Monde spoke about the symbolic loss of cultural wealth. People in Germany said it was a problem with the monarchy's image. The simple premise, which included stolen or sold diamonds that were linked to famous people, made it easy to tell short stories and got people all over the globe interested. The King of England was in the middle of a media storm that made people doubt not only his own judgment, but also the judgment of his adored wife. It turned out that public statements that stressed the privacy of internal family matters were not enough. Many people couldn't stand the official quiet because of how important the handwritten request from the late Queen was. A former high-ranking official at the palace told a reporter, "There is no counter-argument that will make people happy." The guy answered, "When the late Queen herself gives orders." As the rumor spread, it became harder for Queen Camilla to handle her official duties. At the start of a charity function, a reporter cried to the king, "Did you steal the jewels, Your Majesty?" The cameras caught Camilla saying, "Don't be silly." The video spread quickly, and many people who saw it agreed that the ferocity of the debate confirmed their belief that she was defensive rather than sorry. The Spectator remarked, "It's all rubbish." Princess Anne kept doing her official duties with an air of stoic expertise while everything else was going on. She had always done all of that. Others who wrote about her and others who saw her began to see her as the family's moral anchor, even though she never gave any big speeches about being honest or doing her obligations. Data from public opinion showed that the harm to the reputation was real. Several polls showed that Queen Camilla's popularity rating had slipped to almost single digits in several samples in the days after the scandal reached its peak. This is a very low grade for a senior royal, and some people could think it's a big decline. According to the poll findings, almost 4 out of 5 people who answered said they believed Princess Anne's story, while just a small number of people who answered said they agreed with Camilla's point of view. The overall favorability rating of the monarchy dropped by around 20 points on a variety of different measures until ultimately settling down at a lower baseline value. These numbers are only snapshots that show a time of heightened emotion. The real problem for the organization was less about the numbers and more about the structure. A loss of faith might happen over a longer period of time and be harder to recover from. For those who were within the palace, the effects were both personal and institutional. At first, courtiers and officials stayed away from Clarence House because they knew how the people felt and how it may hurt their careers. A handful of Camilla's senior staff members didn't talk to her family as often. People who had previously supported her were asked to think about it again, and invitations to take on certain prominent roles were quietly taken back. A woman who had spent decades striving to solidify her place in the monarchy found the unexpected loss of power to be a public and embarrassing reversal of her position. King Charles clearly had to deal with the problem. When he was out in public, he spoke less confidently and seemed tired. A private advisor released the quote, "I have broken her heart, but I cannot break the crown," just after the occurrence, and it spread quickly. The message was designed to show a balancing act of remorse and obligation. Some individuals thought it was a clear sign that the royal family's personal loyalty and the institution's needs would not always match up. Many observers say that the only way to solve these problems is to put one over the other. The event was both comforting and sad for Princess Anne. She won a rare moral victory and people started to think more highly of her. Editorialists praised her honesty and called her the guardian of a fragile tradition. But the event also made the problems that were already there in the family worse. Because private matters took center stage, the public's view of a monarchy that was united in duty faded. This led to an institutional hemorrhage. The crown's symbolic capital, which is the reservoir of trust that supports ceremonial authority, had been used up. In the meanwhile, William and Catherine were able to get through the circumstance by carefully planning everything they did. They didn't want to emphasize on triumphalism. Instead, they wanted to focus on continuity and service. The extensive documentation that Catherine had done earlier had been very important, and William's insistence on giving procedural answers had been very important behind the scenes. Because of this, they became increasingly popular with the public, and many saw them as the faces of moral stability and an emotional future for the monarchy. Instead of being a show of wealth, the photos of Catherine wearing Diana's jewels after the controversy were shared and recast by sympathetic sources as a meaningful tribute instead of a provocative appropriation. This was done to prevent seeming like they were stealing anything. Some of the problems with the scandal were not fixed. In only a few weeks, most of the treasures that were known about were quietly returned to the vaults. The people in charge of the royal collection then began an official but secret effort to restore the integrity of the inventory. But rumors kept going around. People whispered at auctions and in collector circles that certain artifacts could have been sold privately and couldn't be found again. The story wasn't only about the past, it was open-ended. If another item that matched came up in a far-off catalog, the wound would bleed again. These rumors were still a threat that was hidden. In the long term, the effects on institutions have been quite large. The event hurt Camilla's position and power, and it set back some of the hard work she had done to build relationships with charities and the public. It was a public embarrassment for Camilla, and it will be hard for her to get over it completely. This crisis typified the early years of King Charles's reign. It left him with an obvious lack of power and doubts about his ability to deal with family disagreements. King Charles was the crown prince when this issue started. The experience maintained Princess Anne's reputation as someone who is dedicated to her duties and cannot be bribed. It also gave her a lot of moral capital inside the organization. The crisis taught the monarchy as a whole a hard lesson about how fragile public trust is and how dangerous it is when government institutions rely as much on informal habit as they do on clear procedure. There were additional changes made to the technical parts. Palace officials made steps to improve inventory controls, set up permissions for moving items from the collection, and update digital tracking systems all at the same time. The royal collection was kept safe according to the best curatorial standards, and rules were made to make it clear which objects belonged to the state and which belonged to private families. Also, outside auditors were briefly thought about to make sure the public that the collection was being kept safe. These actions, which were carefully worded and made public, were meant to show that the people in charge were responsible and could change things. However, they also quietly acknowledged the problems that had led to their implementation. The event made arguments over the monarchy's present position even more heated. People who were against the scandal said that it showed how organizations may avoid basic responsibilities and how unclear ownership might make it easier for bad conduct to happen. On the other hand, supporters of the monarchy stated that it is a historical and symbolic position that requires caution and family practice. They told people not to expect the institution to work like a business. What rules of openness and stewardship should apply to objects that are both personal to a family and part of the country's history? The crisis made this subject public, no matter how good the reasons were. The diamonds were discovered again in their secure trays, sparkling brilliantly under the light they were already used to after the news headlines had faded down for a few months. The tale that stuck with them, on the other hand, changed the symbolic weight of things. They were no longer just relics of a bygone era or beautiful decorations worn on state occasions. Instead, they were proof of how close a historic institution had come to compromising from within. They also served as a reminder that stewardship is about more than just following security standards. It's also about doing the right thing. For the general public, the scandal was like a play with real people. Princess Anne was shown as a loyal protector. Queen Camilla was shown as the troubled wife. King Charles was shown as a man, torn between private love and public duty. And Catherine and William were shown as heirs to a future that seemed to have gained a new moral urgency. It was a warning to courtiers about the risks of acting informally and the effects of not speaking out. This was a useful lesson for the monarchy, since it showed that trust from the people is what counts when it comes to power. The storm passed quickly, but the experience left a mark, a press that is more careful, a public that is more critical, and a royal family that knows that the next crisis may not be solved by ritual or charm. At the end of the day, the diamonds were once again concealed behind their locks and the vault doors. However, the way people saw them had changed. Their brightness suddenly carried with it stories of betrayal and healing, trust and breaking. The House of Windsor, which has long relied on a mix of tradition and secrecy, learned that the strongest ties between an institution and its people are not generally stones and money, but rather the trust that exists between them. The House of Windsor had found this out. After being put to the test, these kinds of bonds require time and careful handling to be fixed. Thank you for watching the video. Please let us know your thoughts, and goodbye for now.